Hello, everybody, and welcome to a mechanic spotlight video where I am going to be talking all about the mechanic training from Crimson Vow Draft. If you do enjoy this video and want to see more like it, let me know in the comment section down below, and remember to hit that thumbs up button, and of course, subscribe to the channel for more draft content. Without further ado, let's dive in. In this video, I'm going to be discussing why training is weak as a mechanic, how it could be fixed or improved, and then some key takeaways so that when we see similar mechanics in the future, we will know how to evaluate them. So let's get started. Why is training weak? So first of all, what is training? It is a mechanic that says whenever this creature attacks with another creature with greater power, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. So Perish Blade Training is the example here. It's a 2-mana 1/2, and then it has some extra utility with the counters that it potentially gains. And the first reason why training is weak is because it is slow. And the way you think about it is in this stereotypical play pattern with a card like Perish Blade Trainee, you play it on turn 2, and because you won't have any other creatures a lot of the time, you won't be able to get a counter until turn 4 at the earliest, pretty much, because there's not a lot of haste creatures in the set. So you play this on turn 2, then on turn 3 you play your 3-drop. If that doesn't die and Perish Blade Trainee doesn't die, you can then attack on turn 4, and you can potentially get your counter. So there's a lot that kind of needs to go right, and you only end up with a counter on turn 4, and by that point your opponent may just have a 3-power creature that can just block the Perish Blade Trainee, and you won't even be able to attack. And it just makes it very, very awkward, and it's very, very slow to set up. And it gets even more awkward if you have something like a 3-drop, especially like a 2-powered 3-drop. So there's a 3-mana 2/1 flyer that has training in this set, and in that case you need to make sure that on turn 4 you play a 3-powered creature and have that stick around so that then you can finally attack on turn 5 to get your training going. It really is just a slow mechanic, and it makes it hard to use properly. Another problem with training is that it's inflexible. You can only use it in decks that want to attack, and while a lot of decks are going to be aggressive, you don't necessarily want to be forced to attack to use your cards, because sometimes you're going to be in situations where you have to block, and in those cases Perish Blade Trainee is a 2-mana 1/2, which is just vastly understated and not really going to get the job done. And it's similar with a lot of the training cards where they start off relatively small for the amount you're paying for them, and you kind of have to get that first counter for them to be really worth the mana. And at that point, you kind of have to be able to attack, and sometimes you're not in a situation where you can attack. So the mechanic is not really flexible, which isn't inherently a problem, but but it does make it a little bit weaker than a mechanic that can be used in any situation. And then finally, the cards are just not pushed when they have training on them. A lot of some of the rares and mythics have really powerful triggers when you put a counter on them or things of that nature, but a lot of the cards are things like Perish Blade Training, which are just kind of weak cards. If this was a 1/3, it would be significantly better, because on turn 3 it's way less or on turn 4 more so, it's way less likely that your opponent's going to have a 4-powered creature, so you can if you're on the play at least, so you can potentially attack with this and your 3-drop more easily and make this into a 2/4, and then it's a lot harder for your opponent to deal with. So the cards are just not necessarily pushed. So comparing training to a mechanic like Mentor, which is a pretty obvious comparison, not only because the kind of keywords are similar, but because they have a similar effect, I just think that it's interesting to look at Mentor on this same axis, where, again, Mentor is mechanic from Guilds of Ravnica. It's whenever a creature attacks, you put a counter on another creature with less power. And the thing with Mentor is it often came on 3-drops that had 3 power. So you would play your 2-drop, then you play your Mentor creature like Blade Instructor, and then you would be able to attack and put a counter onto one of your creatures. And that one just kind of knocks out the slow, because you'll almost always immediately be able to get it if you have curved out, whereas even if you are curving out with training, it's still going to cause you to wait an extra turn, because you can't just attack with your creature immediately. So Blade Instructor, you played on turn 3, on turn 4 you're attacking and triggering it. Mentor, you play your training creature on turn 2, or you play your Mentor creature on turn 3, and you're not really going to be able to trigger it for another 2 turns, because you then have to play a creature with more power. So just even just having a slightly quicker version of a similar kind of idea of a mechanic really makes the card mechanic a lot different. So here are some fixes that I can think of to the training mechanic. Again, here's an example card. This is probably the best training common, because having a large toughness kind of works well with training, because it makes it easier to start attacking with it. But here's some potential fixes I had. Make it into an activated ability. This was kind of my first idea. There's no reason in my mind why training as a mechanic would have to be combat focused. I mean, I feel like a lot of the times you're not really training on the battlefield anyway. You're training in preparation for the battlefield. So one fix that I was thinking of was if you make it into either an attack ability, or you can tap and tap the training creature and tap a creature that has greater power. So for example, that way you play your Apprentice Sharpshooter on turn 3, and then on turn 4 you would play like a 4-mana 3/3, and then you could use your Apprentice Sharpshooter to tap and also tap the four powered creature you just played, maybe make it only usable at sorcery speed, and then you can put a counter on the Apprentice Sharpshooter right away. So it will put you shields down. It makes it an interesting decision because then you are going to be exposed to your opponent's attacks, but you can start using your mechanic right away to grow your creatures. It works especially nicely with that Perish Blade Trainee, because then you're playing that on turn 2. On turn 3, you play a creature that has more than 1 power, and you immediately can grow your Perish Blade Trainee, even though you're exposing yourself to some attacks. So it actually makes it into a nice mechanic that you can actually use outside of combat to grow your creatures, but it does have some risk because it will expose you to attacks. It's kind of like a Yasper, a Sentinel kind of wording is how I viewed it. You could just play a creature and it would be able to be used while it was summoning sick. It really does make the mechanic, I think, a lot more powerful, and I don't think it would actually make it too powerful as long as you kept it in mind while balancing, and so that was just something I had in mind. The next kind of idea I had is add more unique training benefits. Instead of only having the creature get an extra +1/+1 counter, there are some mechanics that Magic has had in the past where it'd be really interesting to give you an additional benefit. So in Ikoria, there were a mechanic that you could put ability keyword counters onto your creatures, and they could have had something like that return, where maybe Apprentice Sharpshooter, when it trains, gains Death Touch or something of that nature. So then all of a sudden, instead of just getting a +1/+1 counter, I mean, your 3-mana 1/4 is more of a defensive body anyway, and you don't necessarily have to be training to attack. So you can maybe use your training ability. When it attacks with another creature, Apprentice Sharpshooter gains Death Touch or something of that nature. It reminds me of the way the Exert mechanic in Amonkhet was mostly geared towards combat. So when you exert it, it's going to get just a stats boost. But then there were also some cards like Watchful Naga that would let you use your Exert to gain some other benefit. And I think that was a really cool addition to the mechanic and made it a lot more interesting, and was one of the cooler spaces that they then fleshed out even more in Hour of Devastation. And I think that's something that they could have done with training, where it didn't necessarily only have to be +1/+1 counters, because +1/+1 counters are very limiting, because, I mean, putting a counter on a creature is all well and good, but it doesn't necessarily, it's not as deep of a mechanic in that way. And I think it would have been more interesting if you had some potential other upsides. Bringing back keyword mechanics, keyword counters would have been pretty cool. Like maybe you gave your creature flying, or things like that nature. And then you could have had some cool archetype payoff cards, like when this creature trains something else, or is used to train something, then you can give that a special keyword like flying or something like that. Like, I think that's just probably a little slightly different mechanic, but I think it's a cooler mechanic in many ways. And then finally, I think that giving the creatures better stats would have just been an easy way to fix it. If you just like add a toughness to all of your training, all of the training creatures, they would just be a little bit more pushed. If you maybe make the creatures have, like, some creatures have haste, that would be pretty nice, because then you can train immediately when you play your 2-drop that has training, and then you play your 3/3 with haste or something, and then you can immediately start training. That would have been a nice addition to help the training decks. And overall, I think that there was just a lot of just slightly underpowered creatures that needed an extra toughness or an extra power, or not really an extra power, because you really just want more toughness with training so that you can start putting those counters on. But if you just have a couple of 1/3s instead of 1/2s, or if you just push the creatures, like, that's why Apprentice Sharpshooter is good, is because it has high toughness, low power. If you just kind of gear your creatures like that and make yourself have like a couple 1/3s instead of things like 1/2s, that could make a difference as well to make it a more powerful mechanic. So what are the key takeaways about training that can maybe be applied to future mechanics? The first one is that it's important to be wary of slow mechanics for aggressive decks, because when you look at training, it's pretty apparent that it's going to be used for aggressive decks where you're going to be attacking your opponent. But it's also a mechanic that you have like a 2-turn delay on, which kind of immediately should shoot up red flags, where it's like, well, I played my 2-drop with training, and I'm trying to pressure my opponent, but I'm going to be attacking them with a 1-powered creature on turn 3, and everything has to go right for me to attack with a 2-powered creature on turn 4 with my 2-drop with my Perish Blade Trainee or something like that. Or just the mechanic looks like it would be good in aggressive decks because it cares about you attacking, but then it also gives you understated creatures to attack with, which makes it difficult. So that sort of tension in a mechanic, which is kind of built in, is something to be wary of. And then second, the payoff needs to be worth the effort. The mechanic gives you a +1/+1 counter, but it also has a lot of risk, where if you're not attacking, if you can't get a curve out going, if you only draw one creature, it really needs to give you a little bit more, I think, when it's kind of starting off kind of so weak. And then finally, some mechanics are duds. I think it's sometimes easy to look at a set and be like, okay, all of these mechanics are going to be home runs, or you look at the cards and you just kind of assume that they're going to work out perfectly, but not every mechanic does work. It is nice to try not to be too critical, because oftentimes the weird, wacky mechanics are much better than they look on first glance. So, for example, Learn and Lesson was a mechanic that looked a little bit funky and it was kind of hard to evaluate. Or the Decay tokens from Midnight Hunt were a little bit weird and funky and hard to evaluate, and those mechanics ended up being great. But some mechanics really just don't work out perfectly, and it's nice to be able to kind of keep that in mind and make sure that you don't always just get into best case scenario mentality when you're looking at the cards. So those are just some takeaways that I think we can all learn from evaluating training. Anyway, that is going to do it for this video. I really do hope you enjoyed watching it. Let me know if you'd like to see more mechanic spotlight videos in the future. Remember to hit that thumbs up button if you enjoyed the video, comment with your questions, and subscribe for more draft content. If you would like to support my work and my videos, be sure to check out the Patreon, patreon.com/NicolaiBolas, gain access to some cool rewards, and help me continue to make these videos. And if you did make it all the way to the end, in the comment section down below, leave hashtag training wheels, because that's kind of a fun pun, and the training cards often do wheel in Crimson Vow Draft because they're not particularly strong. So that is going to do it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will talk to you next time.